The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I will get it started by introducing everyone and the MDS team, and then today's agenda. So I'll start with a brief intro of who we are at MDS. My name is Jara Gruen. I am the Director of Marketing here at Maureen Data Systems. We're a woman-owned IT services and solutions company. We provide best-of-breed IT solutions in identity and security, infrastructure and productivity and applications to ensure every organization achieves operational excellence and efficiency by implementing the latest IT technologies. That being said, in the light of the DFS compliance regulations, which were officially implemented on August 25th of this year, 2017, MDS is facilitating this comprehensive compliance push specifically related to DFS, which is currently rolling out only in New York State. If successful in New York, this regulation will likely be rolled out nationwide. By employing our best-of-breed partners such as Netwrix, MDS can facilitate a more comprehensive DFS solution by employing various aspects of what each of our partners has to offer to help you comply with DFS. Our goal is to not only help you become compliant, but to also streamline your overall security protocol in the process. If we could just go to the next slide, please. I'm also going to start overviewing today's agenda. So first we're going to start with our MDS practice security lead and our resident compliance expert, Ash Marcos. He's going to present a high-level overview of what DFS entails and discuss key deadlines you need to comply by. Then we'll move on to Steve Turk, who's the account executive at Netwrix, to discuss how Netwrix can help you become DFS compliant. From there, we'll move on to Roy Lopez, senior engineer at Netwrix, who will show us a demo of Netwrix Auditor. With that remaining time, we'll have for Q&A. I ask you to leave your questions to the end. We'll first review some questions from Netwrix, and then we'll go on to Ash Marcos from MDS to answer specific questions related to DFS from an MDS perspective. After that, we will ask you to fill out a survey. The PDF link will be sent out immediately following the webinar. Just note that everyone who fills out the survey will be automatically eligible for a $25 Amazon gift card. We very much value your feedback and encourage you to please fill out the survey. Again, it's very brief, and again, you'll be eligible for an Amazon gift card. So let's get started. Next, we'll start with Ash Marcos from MDS. Take it away, Ash.
Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me? Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, guys. My name is Ash Marcos. I'm the cybersecurity lead here at MDS. One of the area where we focus is regulatory and cybersecurity, and one of them is being the New York DFS. So the New York DFS, it's been in the works for the past 2 years. It came effective March this year, and you have 2 years to be fully compliant. And they gave, New York was nice enough to give you a phase-based approach to deploy this. And there are 17 controls where you need to focus on, right? The first deadline was August 28th, where you have to certify or you have to sign on the DFS website and say you will be compliant all this stuff by the deadlines that are coming, right? So the next major deadline is in February, and then there's another one that's coming in 2019. So today we're going to focus on the key area where Netwrix is going to help us. It's on the access privilege, audit trail, and some of the other security features that it has. So there are 17 controls. Majority of them are policy and process that you have to develop. So if we go to the next slide. So in here, these are the key, go back one more. Yeah. So these are the key deadline. The first one, what I talked about, August 28th. By August 28th, you should have logged on to the DFS website and certified that you're going to be compliant with the 6 areas. Those are primarily policy and procedures that you have in place, right? And if your company is 10 million and less, and you're an exempt entity, you should have filled out by September 27 that you're an exempt. But even if you're an exempt, you still have to go through meet some of the 9 requirements in here. So the next major deadline where you really need to focus on and where they're going to be asking you for artifacts is the February 15 deadline. By then, you should have a cybersecurity program, a policy, you should have designated a CISO and the access privilege, and then you should have definitely incident response plan. Next slide. So this is again repeating what I just talked about. By August 28th, you should have the 6 controls in place. Next slide. This is where now you should focus on more. By March 1st, you need to have a CISO report. This is where Netwrix is going to help you with who has access to your system, what's your audit, and the CISO need to format this, right, and need to give it in a report, executive report statement, and those reports need to be generated using some type of tools, right? And then that's where Netwrix will come and help you. Next slide. Okay, so this is just going through, you can keep on going, keep next. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, keep going. Next slide. Most of the stuff I talked about it. The incident response plan is going to be a key area where you need to spend time. This indirectly ties with Netwrix because if you have an incident, you need some type of audit trail for investigation. So you need to develop a security incident plan, and that plan need to translate to some type of tools that you're going to be using. Thanks. Same thing on the continuous monitoring. You should have a tool that's going to allow you to monitor both malicious activity, log auditing, access logs, and then we'll touch later on that most of this continuous monitoring also need to be archived. Click next. So the biggest area is the risk assessment, and DFS specifically calls out for a risk assessment that's preferably based on NIST. You don't have to do that, but you can use the ISO or any other standard. But everything is going to be based on risk. What is that a core application or a core database or a core business system that is very highly risk for your organization, and how are you protecting it? So basically, at the end of the day, it comes down to how are you protecting those sensitive PII data. Thanks. So this is a timeline of MDS readiness assessment for DFS, right? So if you had engaged us early on, back in January, February, this would be the approach we would lay out, right? And this is in a full-blown DFS assessment and implementation. So we followed the timeline that DFS gave from a deadline perspective. And then just in order, anything that you see in blue is policies, that we're going to be developing. Anything in blue and yellow is you have to establish a team, and this is where the CISO is going to come. Anything in red is some type of technology that need to be deployed. And then anything in a darker color, those are, training, knowledge transfer, that we have to, you have to have. Next. Next slide. So this is the 2018 goal. 2017 is primarily preparing you for the deadline for 2018. And 2018, you just have to produce the artifact. If you get audited, make sure that you have all the implementation plan, policy, procedures. So that's how we would help you. There's another one for 2019. If you click next. Oh, so we skipped, that's fine. We skipped a slide. For 2019, right. Sorry, so 2019, the biggest one is third-party risk assessment. Click next. So what does MDS offer, right? MDS, we take all those 17 controls, and then we give you 3 charts. The minimal requirement is for a company that are exempt, and they have to meet only the minimal requirements. So those minimal requirements are the X1. So we will work with you to make sure you have those policy procedures and the technology behind it to make sure that you're in compliance. The quick starter is, these are, if you want to engage us in 2017 early on and go through it, or you miss the deadline and you need to prepare for it, it's a quick way to get you started, to make sure that you have the proper policy procedures. Maybe you already have existing technologies that you want to leverage. The quick starter is a quick way for you to get up to speed and make sure that you meet the deadline by February. The fast track is more a gap analysis. Maybe you started DFS by yourself. Maybe somebody else started it, or maybe you have a majority of this policy and procedures because you have other compliance. Maybe you have HIPAA or PCI or any other compliance, and you just have to see where the gap is and fill in the gap for the DFS service. Click next. And then as part of, after the assessment, we go through the implementation. Again, similar process. Next. Yeah. One more. So one of our key vendor, Netwrix, is going to help you meet 2-3 of the controls, and those are very key controls that auditors are looking for. So I'm going to pass on at this point to Netwrix, and they will tell you most of the solution. Thank you, guys.
Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Turk from Netwrix Corporation. One of the folks who can respond, let me know if you can see my screen and hear me, please.
Yes, you're all set, Steve.
Okay, very good. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to just talk a little bit about Netwrix. Initially, we've been in the business of providing compliance assistance and infrastructure visibility since 2006. Our headquarters are in Irvine, California. We have a very large global customer base, but we specialize in providing a platform for IT infrastructure visibility. And what that actually means is the ability to track changes and identify potential vulnerabilities within your infrastructure and report on all of these and provide you alert to all of these, which plays hand in hand with the compliance requirements for DFS and many others. In terms of visibility for Netwrix and our customer base, this really means we enable you to know what exactly has changed, when it's been changed, where it was changed, who's accountable for the change, and if applicable, what the before and after values of the change were. We also tell you who has the access and permissions or security to do things and who perhaps should not have. So for example, in terms of analyzing your file servers, we would let you know who's got permission to do what, how they got the permission, was it inherited or was it via a group membership or was it provided explicitly, things of that nature. Okay, we also provide information about who's tried to do something and succeeded at it, who has failed at it. So activity reports of successful activity in your infrastructure and also failed activity. We'll let you know once you establish your security policies who's adhering to those or who's exhibiting potentially strange behavior. So for example, usage outside business hours, other types of behaviors that you can identify and track using Netwrix Auditor. We also enable you to see into the past. What that means is that we gather up information about your infrastructure and we store it for a long period of time. So for example, in terms of some of the compliance requirements require you to keep information and audit records for up to 10 years. You have complete control as a user on how long you want to keep this audit information for Netwrix. And as a result, you can go back and see, for example, who had permission to do what a year ago or 6 years ago, ever since the software was initially installed. What were the changes made? Who were in your admin groups, and all kinds of things that aren't applicable to today, but were applicable at some point in the past. From a compliance perspective, most of the applications and organizations who require Netwrix Auditor do so because they have some kind of compliance requirement. Netwrix Auditor applications map the specific compliance IT control requirements to the audited systems that were installed in your environment and the reports that are required by the various compliances that you need to be in compliance with. We automate the collection of that data and the delivery of the reports. We enable you to create your own reports as well as provide many hundreds of predefined reports. And as I mentioned, we can archive this information for as long as you need to, and we make it simple to retrieve it so you can report on and do forensic investigations if necessary. The Netwrix Auditor platform is a unified application platform today consisting of 12 applications. Now, all of these applications can be acquired individually with the exception of the one for Exchange on-premise that requires Active Directory on-premise as well. But they all run in what we call a single pane of glass, meaning a unified application interface. Once you know the mechanics of one, you know them all essentially. There are many common services for each application. You can create what we call monitoring plans to indicate how you want to monitor your infrastructure components. You set up alerts in the same way. You set up free-form search the same way. You generate reports and set up report subscriptions in the same way for all of the applications. So it's truly a unified, integrated, single pane of glass application platform. Some of the applications have multiple feature sets. For example, with Netwrix Auditor for Active Directory, it includes Active Directory auditing, group policy auditing, a wizard for rolling back attributes, objects, and OUs if you need to. It tracks AD logon activity. It also provides some utilities for letting your folks know that their passwords are about to expire. It also provides some capability for you for tracking inactive users and computers. Several of these applications have multiple feature sets. Another one I will just mention briefly is Netwrix Auditor for Windows servers, which not only shows Windows servers changes relative to hardware and software and configuration and registry changes and things like that, but also shows local users and group changes, local user logons, and has a relatively unique capability to capture video activity of someone. This capability can be triggered very selectively, so at a later date you can see what that someone has done at their terminal as if you were standing over their shoulder and watching them do it. Netwrix Auditor primarily provides visibility. And we talk about two types of visibility. One is active visibility, where you get notified things. You don't have to go look for it. You get alerts to changes and access activity. You can create these alerts based upon what you know you need in advance, or you can create them based upon actual events, meaning audit records that you get in the system. All of the events are threshold enabled, so you can create thresholds if you need to or not. There's also a pre-built alert library that allows you to select and modify and then save it as a new alert. We talk about passive visibility. That's more for things that you need to look for. When you go to generate reports, for example, there are literally hundreds of predefined reports that for all kinds of changes, access activity, and for snapshots. Snapshots are the mechanism that enable you to see what's going on in your current infrastructure or the state of your infrastructure, where it shows you things like current permissions, current group memberships, current group policies, and things of that nature. All of the reports can be subscribed to, or you can let people subscribe their own. So when you have a series of folks in an organization that need to get, let's say, audit reports at some frequency, that's essentially what you're able to do. I mentioned before that the compliance requirements for various compliances, including the New York State Department of Financial Service cybersecurity regulations, are mapped to Netwrix auditor applications and to the reports provided by those applications. There's also a free-form search capability, which enables you to actually enter free text and do searching on that, and also enables you to enter various variables based upon these drop-down lists at the top here. These searches also can form the basis of an alert. So for example, it's hard to show in slideware, but if I were to go one screen beyond this toolbar here, I would be able to create an alert from anything I'm seeing directly on screen. So if you see something that looks spurious, or you know you want to be alerted to it the next time through, you can do that directly, right from here. So the search result is actually can be used as a basis for an alert. You're doing it as you view the records, the live records that are coming into your system. Like I said before, they're threshold enabled. You can also choose to select some from a pre-built library, and you can modify and save those. And you can choose to send an alert by email or SMS. There are many, many, many predefined reports. There are virtually hundreds of them for all infrastructure components if you consider all the filtering capability. So for example, we're going to show you an Active Directory, obviously the who, the what, the when, the before and after values if applicable for all Active Directory and group policy object changes. I'm not going to be reading all of these, but I'll just let you glance at them for a moment. We're going to track all the AD logon activity, like I have here bulleted. In terms of historical reporting, the report screens allow you to throttle back the dates from which you want to begin the reports. Last month, last week, last year, 2 years, last quarter, all kinds of things. And an active user tracking, which I mentioned briefly before, allows you to track inactive computers and people. The period of inactivity is user defined, so you can say, for example, what computer or person hasn't logged in the last 90 days. You'll get a list of those, and then you'll be able to determine how you want to deal with them. There are a number of disposition options. There's also some high-level graphic displays. For each audited system, we provide a graphic like this. This doesn't have a lot of data. I'm just trying to show something for clarity here. But this is a display of Active Directory changes. Okay? And if you see something that's potentially anomalous, you can just click on it, and then you can get a more detailed report that shows the action, the object type it was, you know, who did it, when they did it, and in most cases, the workstation where it was generated from, where the event was generated from. Mentioned the snapshot capability. This is the infrastructure, providing infrastructure visibility for what you have, the state of your current Active Directory. All of this group information is provided for what is currently seen, also current group policy information, user account information, and all of this is available not just for the current state, meaning what you have now, but you can roll back to a point in time, and maybe you need to go back and see, let's say 6 months ago, who had permission to do something, who were members of my domain admin group a year ago, and sometimes forensic investigation requires knowing this type of information. Similarly, for file server activity, Windows file server, NetApp, and EMC devices, we provide the who, what, when, before and after values if applicable. We provide all kinds of activity reporting, change reporting, and historical reporting, very similar to what I mentioned before for Netwrix Auditor for Active Directory. The state and time reports essentially the same. We take a snapshot of your current file servers. We can show you the account permissions, object permission by object, or file, or what files, what people, who has permission to do what against what files. All of this information. This is more object-oriented data, and again, we'll show it for the current state of your file servers, as well as what the state was at some point in the past since our software was initially installed. There are some new areas that Netwrix has ventured into recently, and that is the area of analytics, where we're dealing with some user behavior and potential blind spot reporting. Some of the ones that we'll show during the demonstration, hopefully there's time. Things like interesting aspects about data access, archive data, data access surges and trends, who has excessive permission to do things. For example, we'll show you who has, let's say, in the last 30 days has permission to access certain files but hasn't done so. And maybe you want to throttle down those permissions to eliminate some potential vulnerabilities. Also on the user identity theft side, we have some interesting analytic capabilities that I've highlighted here, and we'll try and demonstrate those as well. In terms of Netwrix Auditor and its compliance capability, the actual architecture is built on an IT controls compliance framework so that the reports are designed to satisfy very specific but generic requirements found in most compliance frameworks. So I just threw up a few examples of the kinds of reports that are available in all for all compliance requirements. But we certainly have defined many to address specific requirements like the New York State Department of Financial Service cybersecurity requirements, but we can actually provide a report mapping from Netwrix Auditor functionality to virtually any compliance requirements. Okay, and those include SOX, HIPAA, GLBA, ISO, and others. Just threw up a few examples. So we actually have a document. I'm assuming that most, if not all, of the folks have downloaded this document from the MDS website that shows primarily a mapping of some of the cybersecurity regulations to some of the reports that Netwrix provides. This document certainly is not all-inclusive by any stretch. So because needs are dependent upon individual organizational requirements. Within Netwrix Auditor, we also provide role-based access control. This is very important to be able to limit who can do what within the Netwrix Auditor itself. So we define this concept of a monitoring plan, which indicates who can actually configure the plan, who can get data from the plan, who gets reports and alerts from the plan, who can change the plan, who administrates the plan. So we assign roles to who can do what. And this is very important, and of course a person's role may span multiple plans depending upon need. There are some interesting system integration add-ons. Netwrix does provide a bi-directional API. We call it our RESTful API. It's fully documented and free of charge. There is some integration effort. There are some generic SIEM integration capability, but we also provide code-based models for these. Okay, some Cisco, Splunk, IBM Radar, Amazon Web Services. So I'm not going to say that they're plugins with no work, but we do provide the code-based free, both for the API and for the application, and there is some work that needs to be done to get them talking to each other and working seamlessly. So my last slide, essentially just summing up why Netwrix and Netwrix Auditor has been so successful. All of our applications run in a single pane of glass. The environment is architected to be a unified application environment. We do not require any intrusive agents on domain controllers or servers. There is multiple integration facilities for organizations who want to integrate with other capabilities, including device management systems, SIEMs, and a variety of other facilities that people are looking to leverage information from and into. Netwrix Auditor provides a very easy way of getting started. We provide a virtual software appliance that supports both VMware and Hyper-V. We will essentially provide, in most cases, pre-sales configuration support to get you up and running relatively quickly. We have implementation services from start to finish that we call a jumpstart, and there is multiple mechanisms for post-sales support. I am done with my part of the presentation. After Roy Lopez does his demonstration, both he and I will take Netwrix-related questions and turn it back over to MDS for more MDS-related questions. Any questions about pricing and licensing, please address to MDS, because they're our partner who is going to be the point contact for Netwrix in these instances.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Everybody, can somebody confirm that you're hearing me and you're seeing my screen at this point?
I do.
Okay,
Yep,
perfect.
thank you.
So continue on. By the way, thank you, Ash. I think that was a good, definitely a good overview. Obviously, MDS&Y has the capabilities to help you folks with regards to understanding what the DFS cybersecurity requirements are. And Steve, thank you for presenting what Netwrix Auditor can do and how we play in. Important to note that Netwrix Auditor, as Steve well pointed out, has a lot of reporting capabilities and it has a broad scope of coverage. But keeping this very focused from the point of view of the DFS requirements, Ash pointed out earlier that essentially part of those requirements are also satisfied by other IT controls and other compliances, like if you're compliant with NIST 800 Rev 53 Rev 4, which is the cybersecurity framework that was put together by the then Obama administration back in 2013. So basically that framework is still out there. Hopefully it will not be canceled from that point of view, but going forward, let's just say your Netwrix Auditor, basically, as Steve pointed out, is a Windows-based application. It will be installed on a member server inside of your environment. Once you install it on your member server, the Netwrix Auditor, as Steve stated, you have to create what we call monitoring plans. That's just basically coming in here and deciding which of the different types of data sources you want to monitor within your environment. Though it's important to note when you're thinking about the capabilities of an application and you have compliance on your mind, it's important to know what are your systems that are in scope for said compliance. Because that will be determining what data sources, like in the Netwrix world, what you'll be turning on. But once you turn these on, you'll start to get some interaction from the system. The very first interaction that you're going to get is you're going to start to get some emails. For instance, our system will start to send you these emails as to advise you what exactly is going on in the environment. And part of any compliance framework or IT control is to make sure that you have awareness insofar as, or like we like to say, visibility insofar as what's going on. What you can see about this particular email notification, which is a change email notification, is telling you the 4 W's of auditing in a clear, human readable, understandable English, right, per se. It's basically telling you the who is always the actor, the when did they make the change, where, which is in this case, because it's Active Directory, the domain controller, and then the what, the subject of the change, so you know exactly what took place on a particular date and time. You will also learn what was the workstation from where they initiate the change, and then in human readable format, we'll do all the event correlation for you to present the data of what they actually changed in these formats. So you'll get information that starts to look like this, okay? This information will also be color-coded from that point of view. As Steve pointed out, and as we see in some of the specifications for the DFS, there are going to be some requirements in being able to be aware of what's also not going on in just say like your Active Directory per se, but also potentially on say like your file servers. And in the case when you configure the file server application, you'll start to see some interactions like this. You'll see essentially exactly, what were the changes that have taken place since the last time we collected the data. Again, we will present the data in a consistent format. This is that whole point that Steve was making about common services. There's a common interface, a common way in which we display the data. It's always with the standard 4 Ws of auditing and also previous values and current values. In this particular one, we'll see that for file servers, these are particularly Windows file servers, could be NetApp, could also be EMC, primarily on the CIF side, in other words, the Windows kind of sharing kind of capabilities of those platforms. And we tell you all the different types of activities that the users could be performing, which is going to be a little bit more than they could do in, say, like Active Directory. But basically, then we start to break them all out. And then you see exactly what a user was doing. So you know that on a particular date and time, this is the particular user who initiates from this specific workstation a remove of a particular file from this particular share. And you know also that they were using, say, like a native tool to do that. That's very useful when you're trying to monitor the issues that are called out in, say, like 514, training and monitoring, where you need to be able to know and understand what's going on in the environment. And you have to have legitimate, as they say, data on that to express your due diligence that you are actually monitoring said environment. So these kinds of emails will be extremely useful to keep you aware of what's going on in the environment, and also could help you in presenting a case of due diligence of what you're supposed to be doing insofar as that. Now, the Netwrix auditor, as Steve pointed out, also has what we call a threat library. In other words, once you create the monitoring plans and they start collecting, you'll get those kinds of emails. But before you can get those emails, you can also start to get alerts. And there are 30 different alerts that are already built in for different data sources. So depending upon the data source that's important to you, SQL Server, file server, VMware, Active Directory, group policies, logon activity, basically there's going to be alert for that. You can see that some of these are going to be tailored to logons. You know, failed logons to the domain. There's also an alert in here that I like to turn on a lot, which is the alert for somebody's trying to log on to your environment and they're using a disabled account, which definitely should perk the mind of some of the CSOs that are currently in the audience today. But basically, this will be a way in which we can start to alert you proactively, or part of what Steve referred to as active visibility, to tell you exactly what's going on. And what I'm doing right now, I'm trying to give you a quick tour de force insofar as the Netwrix Auditor platform before actually digging into specific reports that will be more in alignment with the DFS needs, okay? Now, right off the top, one of the things that you should be aware, Steve talked about role-based access control, and that may or may not be as important to you, but it should be important from this point of view. I can come in here and I can run the Netwrix Auditor a second time. In other words, the Netwrix Auditor as a client is re-entering code. This code can also be installed on, say, the security officer's desk, or the risk management officer's desk, or the internal compliance officer's desk. And then instead of going ahead and having to go to IT and request a report, they can just come in here, because they can be granted, as Steve pointed out, reviewer status, and they can see exactly what's been going on in the environment. And all the reports are like this, that they basically present the data in human readable format. This is a dashboard that's an aggregate level dashboard looking across many data sources. So if I wanted to find out, you know, what was going on in terms of, say, like Active Directory, I would look over here for the color for Active Directory. I would click on that, and as in Steve's slide deck he did, you'd be able to go ahead and drill down into the data points. And then you can see exactly what was the activity. So by the way, this activity is all being documented because essentially the way the Netwrix Auditor works, it's a collection-based system. So it goes out on a regular scheduled basis once every 10 minutes at minimum to collect the data from your environment. Once it collects that data, it sends that data into that into a two-tier storage model. The first tier is what we call the archive. Steve sort of referred to that earlier in his presentation. And then that allows you to deal with long-term data retention requirements, which I believe are yet to be completely formalized insofar as DFS is concerned. But if it's based on anything like NIST, you have to keep it for as long as you ever need it. From that point of view, as NIST 53 is based that way. But basically, you'll be able to know exactly who made the changes within the environment. And because of the alerting, you can turn on the alerts that are there or create alerts to go ahead and get proactive notification on issues that really have a little bit more security importance in the environment from that point of view. So the Netwrix Auditor will allow you to see all the data of what's going on for the different monitoring plans that you have created to monitor your said environments. And these run the gamut. Okay, depending upon your license, you can either be looking at just our Active Directory or you can be looking at just for file servers. But a lot of times, sometimes people forget about, well, I'm going to monitor it for just Active Directory because I'm a Microsoft shop and I have Active Directory. So you know what? All my security is based on Active Directory. Well, that's sort of like not exactly correct. And I say that because basically inside of your environment, you also probably have Windows servers. Okay, not every single server that's in your environment is a domain controller. As I like to say, gone are the days of NT when we used to do that kind of stuff. But basically, you can see anybody on a Windows server that's actually making changes to, say, local security. Now, if that's a Windows server that you have designated as a business critical server, or as Ash pointed out, a core server, that becomes extremely important to you. Because if you could see somebody making local security changes who shouldn't be doing it, specifically if it's a local user going ahead and making those kind of changes, you have a question that you need to pose to your security people, especially with their pen tools. And I believe there's at least 1 or 2 individuals who are actually in the audience right now who are pen specialists from that point of view. So these would be the kind of systems that they would need to then start to target because basically there's a local user performing, say, privilege elevations from that point of view in local security as compared to just Active Directory per se. This exemplifies the point on the value of Netwrix Auditor from a platform that is has a very broad scope of coverage. Aside from what Steve pointed out, the add-ons to the industry standard API known as the RESTful API. So these are things that can be seen automatically. But let's start to get into a little bit more insofar as like what can you see specifically with regards to the DFS requirements and Netwrix reporting from that point. So if we go into the Netwrix Auditor, I'll just put this here to try to not confuse anybody by too many things on the screen. The way we would do this, we go into our reports, and starting off with the concept of 500.02 cybersecurity program, basically under B1 there, basically it requires you to be aware of what's going on in the environment from spot bad actors and activity across your entire environment, cloud environment also. By the way, Netwrix Auditor as a platform also provides for cloud services like Office 365, Azure, Azure and or Amazon Web Services and CenturyLink too, so we can monitor those environments also. So from a single pane of glass, you can do all that. But focusing here, basically one of the reports that they exemplify in this area is under what we call the user behavior blind spot analysis. These are those analytical reports, and in particular, say single user logon from multiple endpoints. Now, the reason why this becomes important to you is that if the user, especially a highly privileged user, is logging in from multiple endpoints, not just mapping multiple drives, but they're logging in from multiple endpoints almost the same time, that could be an indication that that identity has been breached internally, okay? So that's why this particular report becomes extremely important with regards to that insofar as bad actors are concerned. The other one that becomes very important, and this depends upon, it's more of a, has to do with data access from that point of view, but we do have many reports that help you along that line, is if I go to, say, data access, access to archive data. Now, if you have, and everybody here probably does have, file servers within inside of their Active Directory environment, or maybe they might have SharePoint inside their Active Directory environment, at some point in time, you're going to move probably old data off of that to free up some disk space and put it in nearline storage. That's really nice, a nice thing to do, but it's also very important from a cybersecurity perspective, as I'm sure Ash would agree. And that's that basically by having an archive server where you put some data over there, you're also creating it, using it as a potential internal cybersecurity honeypot. So with that, then basically you start to monitor that system and you look to see if anybody's performing any actions on that system. Okay, because a lot of times the server or the servers or shares that are being used in that form are never part of the net logon scripts of the users. Hence, you know, this is somebody who's accessing that. If it's not your administrator or your robocopy user, basically that's probably somebody who's a threat. Okay, because they're out there actively looking for information within your environment. So what you do is basically, I like to say, you pepper that, right? You add more honey and flowers to it to attract the bees out of their lairs, and then basically then you can start to see them doing specific activity. Like here we see a user named SP301 Carla who logged on to the system and basically accessed my file system, and they were accessing it using different coming in from different systems. Okay. So we are capable of telling you what's the initiating workstation. And in my network, this particular initiating workstation address is not a valid address. In other words, it's not part of my private network. It's not part of my wireless network, my public wireless, you know, so it's from somewhere outside. Somebody was accessing and reading some of my files. So that's important to be aware of. And then once you have that kind of data, you can go ahead and track on that. Like for instance, if you see that, you know, you run, say, like this report, right? You come in your day and your personnel, they see this report. Immediately upon seeing this report, they should probably notice that there's a user who's called the D domain administrator, and there's a user called SQ301 Carla. Well, SQ301 is not my domain. My domain is my D domain. That's the name of the server. So that's a local user performing activity on my systems. That's usually a reason for cause for concern. Okay? What you can do is you can come into the Netwrix auditor, and as Steve was pointing out in his earlier presentation, you can leverage our search for discovery. And I can come in here and I can say, I want to say the who, and because the operators are also logical operators, so I can say contains, and I'll say, I won't use the server name, but I'll just say Carla, like that. I'll tell it, go look, hunt. And it's going to go out across my databases and it reveals the following information. Here's the user going ahead and checking in and modifying information on my SharePoint. Here's the user going ahead and adding local users and groups into, say, like my Windows servers. Here's the user going ahead and removing files, adding files, and so on. So I can see this user performing all these different activities in my environment, right? Now, what I would normally do is I would come up here and I would have created an alert in my world, so I can get alerted insofar as this. This is all, I know this is a little bit spread out insofar as the controls are concerned, but I think it gives you the better idea from a holistic perspective how you can use the Netwrix auditor to monitor the environment and then also go ahead and act in the environment, right? So I would come in here and I would go on ahead and create an alert that looks like this. So in other words, what I'm targeting is anybody named Carla who is not from my domain, not authenticated into my domain, and basically that they've copied files or they performed any action on any of my file systems or my VMware or my SQL Server, because if it's Active Directory, right, they can't do that as a local user. They can do it in practically any other platform, but not as a local user. So I can see exactly what did they do, and within near time, I can advise you that basically if this happens at 4:38 in the afternoon, by 4:44, the emails start to go out. Now, it could be an email and or SMS text messages too, from that point of view. But basically, we have it completely documented. So the standard who, what, when, where is provided. So this is the actor. This is the subject of the action. This is the date and time, the server where the action took place, the workstation where it was initiated, and then down here we also see that this was a copy from this location to this particular location, and that they used a native tool to do that, right? That's how it says Explorer EXE as compared to something else, all right? That allows us, by the way, because we can monitor the processes that they're using. There's a lot of processes that happen within say like file servers, unstructured file system data. So in those kinds of situations, we can go ahead and start to omit processes like your ransomware tool, your virus scanner, your malware detector, and or say like your robocopy user. You know, so then that way you can cut back on the amount of noise and really be seeing real actionable data from that perspective. So now we have our alert, but let's just say if I was a CISO, I might say to my technician or my IT person, well, I need to see a report that shows me where this user has been inside of my environment. And what we do here in Netwrix is basically you go to reports. You, instead of going through tediously through each and every one of the application or data sources per se, all you do is simply just come up here for organization level report. You say changes by users, and then you put the user's name inside of here, Carla, and then you run the report. I'm going to expand this area here. You also have the ability to expand this by time frame. So I can come over here, I'll say during this quarter, and then go ahead and run the report. And then basically it will tell me every area where this person has been touching my environment. Totally documented, the standard, you know, who, what, when, where format, very, very applicable with regards to auditors, IT controls, frameworks, DFS, NIST, GDPR, you know, from that perspective, ISO 2700. Those are all the different compliances that these kinds of reports would be applicable for. So now you have your report. And I'll just give you one extra little bonus point here. But basically, let's say we go back and we perform that search and we look for that user and we say Carla, and I'll give you a hint about what searches do that to a certain extent reports don't do. What happens is that reports are nice because they give us all the data. The problem is they structure the data based upon what we call data source. When you look at the same activity and say like a search, really what you have is the user walking through your environment, because every single event that's associated with the particular user is going to be time coordinated. It's not dependent upon the, say, like the data source or the monitoring plan or anything like that. It's basically all based upon time. So in other words, you can actually see the person walking through your system and doing things from that point of view. By the way, if your security team then determines that this really is a real security threat and their pen tools determine that this particular user object or this particular object has been communicating externally outside of your environment, you have the forensic details that you need to hand over to local law enforcement, or in the case of New York State state troopers from that perspective. Digging in through this a little bit more from a more cybersecurity perspective, let's go over here. There's also reports. There's a report in here under 500.02, which has to do with, say, like your Active Directory and being able to see any security group changes that are happening within the environment. But as Ash pointed out, a lot of these are also going to be tied to compliances. Okay, and while we don't have a current compliance call out for, say, like the DFS cybersecurity, right? That's all, as he referenced, is related to the FISMA-NIST standard, okay, in 853 Rev 4. So if I look through here and I'm looking for, say, like group changes, then I can see my group changes also occurring here. So I could say I want to see all administrative group members or administrative group changes. So if I double click on administrative group changes, I run that report and it will show me who's made a change in any of my administrative groups. This is primarily focusing on the domain admins, enterprise admins, schema admins, and operators, account operators. But you can also, because there's a comma delimiting here, you can also set it up for additional users. You set that up by basically coming into a report and performing a subscription. Now, when you perform a report or you subscribe to a report from a compliance perspective, some of these concepts that are in here actually, or features actually change into other concepts. For instance, the fact that you're going to go ahead and set the frequency in which to receive the report, this means that you're doing a continuous assessment of an IT control. Okay, and if you set it for weekly, basically it's going to go from, say, like the previous Monday to the current Monday, showing you what the subject of the report is. So you'll see every day all the different changes that were happening that are applicable to administrative group changes. Okay, so you'll have that. So this is continuous assessment of an IT control. It's very important if you're talking to an auditor and you have an auditor breathing down your neck, or compliance officer, basically they want to see this. They want to know that you have what we call dual verification of all reports. So I can come over here. I only have myself there. Let me go ahead and put in Steve at Netwrix.com. Like that. Basically, they want to know that you can send the report to 2 people at least. That's called dual verification of all reports. That's a very fine print kind of thing. Permeates a lot of different compliance reporting. The reports can be sent out in any of these formats, and those formats can either be attached to an email, or you can create a share where the users will get basically not the report, but they'll get links to the latest copy of the report in the form of an email. So they still get a notification, but it doesn't contain, like, you know, we don't suddenly take 20, you know, a 1 meg file, spread it out across your email system 20 or 30 times, and suddenly you got 30 different copies of the same report. No, we're more efficient than that. So basically you can do that. Very useful, especially if you're sending it out to a distribution group. And then you also have here the filter panel that allows you to change the nature of the report. You can run the reports multiple times if you change the names from that perspective too. So that will help us in being able to be aware of security changes that are happening in, say, like the Active Directory from a security group membership perspective. 500 Rev 4 502 also has a section called B5, and we have a feature that helps you with that, and that's included in our Active Directory. This is what we call the object restore capability. So this allows you then to restore information back into your environment. Okay, and specifically is just for Active Directory from that perspective, but you'll be able to go ahead and roll back, say, like attribute value pairs, or if somebody deletes something accidentally or maliciously, you know, you'll be able to restore the objects back into Active Directory. Mind you, it is contingent upon your security permissions within Active Directory. So if you're not if the user is not a domain administrator, they cannot use this, although if they're a delegated administrator, they can actually use it to roll back attributes in the areas that they are delegated that kind of privilege to. Okay. Audit trail is where I'm going to go next. So basically, in terms of audit trail, it's important for you to note that the Netwrix auditor is based upon a 2-tier storage model. So if I come over here, the long-term archive area, which is nothing but a formal categorized disk repository. It's not a database, but basically it's a disk repository that when we collect the data inside of your environment, we store it all here. Okay, and this is typically on the local system in probably the C or the D drive from that perspective of the Netwrix auditor host within your environment. And important to note, the Netwrix auditor is basically an in-place, an in-site host kind of thing. It's not a web service that you sign up for from that point of view. The second tier of the 2-tier storage model is the Microsoft SQL Server. You could use SQL Server Express, although we should all be aware that SQL Server Express has its limitations. Decent if you're doing just a POC or just trying to kick the tires, check the software out. But really in a production world, it has too many internal caps to reasonably use from a production perspective. Although, you know, depending on the size of the shop, we have seen it being used for like 2 and 3 years in a row. So it is capable from that point of view. But basically, when you see a report, right, if I come back here and I come to this report is manifested as collected data. So when we first collect the data in your environment, we send you these emails. We send you email notifications for either change summaries, or we send you alerts. Do I have my alert here? Let me just bring up a different alert. We send you alerts. So those are all based upon email communications. So the Netwrix order host has to be email enabled in the environment. But basically, once I have this, then and I want to run a report, then passive visibility is where I use, and then basically that's going to be the SQL Server and reporting services. So you need to have a Microsoft SQL Server 2008 R2 or above with Microsoft SQL reporting services enabled. It could be Express or it could be Standard Edition. It really is your choice at that point. Okay, moving forward, we will talk about access privileges. Okay, so access privileges has a lot to do in many different areas, right? It could be SQL servers, it could be file servers, it could be your Active Directory. So you need to be able to monitor different areas. In the case of Active Directory, if I come into here for Active Directory, the main one for monitoring access in Active Directory is going to be called logon activity. Because that's one of the data sources. And what I generally recommend is that customers just go right to something like the high-level reports, like say these summary reports. You'll find that they permeate our application packages from that perspective. In this case here, this is telling you everybody who's been having failures, and the one that comes to mind immediately, here's my CISO, right? Who had 284 logon attempts between yesterday and today, and basically they had one successful one and the rest of them were failed logons. So you can click on the failed logons and then start to see the workstation where they're trying to log in from, the date and time in which they were trying to log in, the user ID that they use, and the reason rationale as to why the failures are occurring. Okay, and if the period or the frequency in which the failures occur are a lot, well then basically, you know, this is probably more associated with a task or maybe an attack, one of the two. Okay, and because it's telling me specifically that the clocks are skewed, well, that's the reason why the user can't log on, because basically those clocks are used as a hash to they use it as an encryption salt for the hash, which is what the only thing that goes across when you're dealing with password authentications and things like that. So basically, you will know exactly, you know, who's logging on to the system, who's accessing your systems from that point of view. So this is if you're looking at it at Active Directory. You also have this available insofar as, say, like your file servers. So if I come into file servers and I go to activities, then down here I have the user activity summary report. And it quickly summarizes what could potentially be many, many pages worth of data. And in particular, for my case, I wind up seeing a couple of local users that are performing some activities inside of my environment. This one had a failed attempt, so we can monitor also failed attempts from that point of view. Very important on file systems, especially unstructured data, to monitor failed attempts, because that could tell you that somebody's knocking at the door trying to get in. If it just happens once for a user, maybe it's just an errant behavior. But if it's persistent, then they're hammering, and that is an indication of intention. If they perform, say, like a deletion of any file within the environment, then you'll have information with regards to that. What's my deletion in here? I think it's on my next page. Yeah, there it goes. So you'll know exactly who's deleted a file within the environment, but you also know if they've removed files, if they copied files, if they modified any files, modify any permissions insofar as the file systems are concerned. You'll have that kind of information available to you also. Let me continue on here. Now, one thing that Steve pointed out is that the Netwrix auditor also has the ability to look at what we call state and time. And what that means to you is that we are collecting the object data for said data source, and we can give you some reporting on that. In the case of file servers, that's going to be the files and the folders. So in this case here, if I run this report called the account permissions report, by default, this report hopefully will not show anything. Mainly because by default it's set up to look for the everyone group and the NT authenticated users groups. So if your people are doing the right things and they've cleaned up the environments of those groups permissions, then basically you'll have nothing. If you wanted to use this report to say, like, look for the particular permissions that a specific user has, then you can go ahead and type in the user's name, put in their logon identity, and say C Briggs, and then rerun the report, and then basically you'll know exactly what permissions they have. And if you have the Active Directory application, you will also know what is the group that is potentially giving her or granting her that permission. Okay. In this case here, we show you all the groups from that point of view. Now, you also want to not only be able to monitor the environment from a cybersecurity perspective in terms of access privileges, not just with regards to say like an individual user, but you need to be able to understand who has permissions within your file systems. And the object permissions by object report is a great report insofar as that's concerned, because basically what it shows us is everybody who has permissions in my file systems. Okay, so I know exactly who has the permissions. But one of the things that's also very important, and this one is important insofar as, just to make sure I got this right, is 509, which has to do with the risk assessment, is that basically I want to know whether or not these people are actually using those permissions. How many of you probably have to receive a certification report from your IT people to say that these are the users who have permissions in this area, get this on a monthly basis, and basically have the ability to say yay or nay, these people who require access no longer require access. Netwrix Auditor has a great report to help you with that, and that's what we call the excess access permissions report. Because in this report, basically what we're doing, it looks very much like the previous report. You see the user, the shares, the permissions that they have, the reasons why they're getting those permissions, but it adds an additional column. It adds a column to tell you that basically for the last 30 days, these people have not used said permission. So that helps you to determine very quickly with data as your goal, right? That basically these users do not have permission. They have permissions, they haven't used them. We can start to either roll this back or we can go ahead and remove it altogether. So in general, it allows you to decrease the vulnerability of your unstructured data systems within the environment. And those tend to be highly suspect insofar as where the bad people want to gain access to from that point of view. So basically, if you're having thoughts about, say, ransomware in your mind, right, which who doesn't nowadays, basically by making sure that the users have the minimum permissions and not really high-level permissions within your file systems, you can either prevent ransomware from being a problem or you can minimize its potential impact. As an example, prospect who became a customer, we ran this report in their environment. Instead of it being SQL tests, it was the home directory where everybody had all their home directories there, right, on that share. But what he saw in the report was that every user had full control at the root of the share. Now, some of you immediately know what that means, and some of you probably are aware of maybe what it means. But basically, what it truly means is that they need to, with that kind of visibility, they need to express governance. And their expression of governance was that they removed everybody from having the full control at the root of the share tree, and basically in their home directories just gave them modify, trying to minimize the potential impact that they can have should any of those touch on a ransomware, some fish file from that point of view. So this one is extremely useful in helping you with issues of risk assessment. Additionally, with regards to say like risk assessment, and I'll continue on in that area, we'll go ahead and see that the user behavior blind spot activity reports, which will provide some more analysis capabilities. And if you go to data access, you'll find that excess access permissions is there also because basically it is a risk assessment report kind of thing. Inside of here, one of the reports that I recommend that customers do is that when they're looking for, say, the people who have permissions, remember that people have permissions in, say, like your Active Directory also, okay? And seeing how sometimes it all begats from Active Directory, it's important to be aware that in the Netwrix Auditor, you have a report that looks like this. It's called the Effective Group Membership Report. And we have reports that tell you who's a member of what group and all that. That's not a problem. The problem in the Microsoft world is nesting. right? So people start nesting people, they put them into groups, and then they nest those groups into other groups. And then sometimes it becomes difficult to figure out, why somebody's gaining permissions. By the way, that's a problem, excess permissioning within inside of Active Directory. And this particular report will show you that. How do I mean that? Look at Alice Gibbons. Alice Gibbons has an explicit assignment inside the domain admins group, okay? That's what that means. In other words, she's a member of the domain admins group. But she's also a member of a group called NJ Staff. And NJ Staff, the reason why it's showing here is because it's nested inside the domain admins group. So you can make a decision, right? You can say, like, you know what, we're going to follow Microsoft best practice. We'll use the grouping only and not give direct privileges, right? So we'll identify that we have an excess permissioning matter here, remove Alice from the domain admins group because she's still gaining it because she's part of NJ Staff. But if we ever toss her out of NJ Staff, she's no longer part of the domain admins group, okay? So basically this helps you to identify excess access permissions within Active Directory. And that's really one of the functions of this. Aside from doing things like decoding or deconstructing, say, like what do they call it again? The nesting inside our environment. I'll give you a quick view of that. If I go to a higher level group, and for those that are more security literate, people who are in Active Directory, the highest level group you can have is really like the built-in administrators group, and the enterprise admins and the domain admins is nested there. But basically inside of here you can see Alice is coming into the administrators group because of that relationship, because the domain admins is actually nested in the administrators group. And then we also see that she's going ahead and gaining access to the privileges that would be in the administrators group because of her relationship in her primary group, which is NJ Staff, which is nested into domain admins, which is then nested inside of the administrators. That's why users suddenly gain more permissions in the file systems that we normally would expect because of these nesting kind of relationships and an inheritance that then follows. So the Netwrix auditor can help you very easily to go ahead and see that and basically read that out in a very human readable form from that perspective. If I'm in this area here, basically you have some additional reports here that help you with risk assessment, access outside of business hours. You can see everybody by default between the hours of 6 p.m. at night and 8 a.m. in the morning who is performing activities. And then you can click on any of these users. So I can click on this particular user and see what activities they were performing. Okay. So I can see that this user is reading files in the wee hours of the morning. Again, potential cause should be a cause for concern. They're also on my SharePoint and also on my Windows server performing some activities there. That's a big cause for concern at that point. It's the one that usually raises the hairs on most of the security officers in the crowd from that perspective. So this report is a very good report to show you, what happens when darkness descends, right? Did evil come out? So let's see here. And then let's go into the one of the areas that Steve was referring to that had to do with being able to see what somebody does, and then really your 511 specification really calls that out, is what we call user activity video recording. It is a sub-feature of what we call the Netwrix Order Windows application package, and that one basically will show you something that you haven't seen before. And if I click on this guy, then basically I can see the activities that a user is performing inside my environment. Now I can speed these up to see exactly, so a little bit more near time from that point of view. If he doesn't really do anything, we'll just move on to a different one. I selected the wrong one here. Let me go ahead and let's go back, say, during this week. We should have some more activity there. There we go. And we can click on one of these. And then basically we can see them stepping through an application. Now, there is no key logging. So for those that are concerned from a security perspective that we're going to capture your password or your key, your code, that's not happening. But basically, this is taking a screenshot. This is one of the few applications that actually Netwrix relies upon a service or an agent per se, and basically the software will deploy it out to the workstations. This is important from a third-party service provider policy perspective because a lot of times you also have to look at how your third-party providers are coming into your environment, right? Sometimes and many times, you know, people are extending, say, like their entire network out to the third-party vendor, right, which is like the entire VPN. We have certainly seen that it's a little bit better practice if they connect to, say, like a terminal server session that you control. So, you know, they keep their software on their machine, and your software is on your machine. And basically, you can then arm your machine with the Netwrix Auditor user activity video recorder that will allow you to get a forensic review of what that service provider was doing inside of your environment. It's a non minimum invasive kind of technology, and basically there's no little key knocker down here saying like you're being monitored or anything like that. You can choose to either present a video screen to them from that to tell them that, hey, you're going to be monitored if because you connected to my systems. So basically you can put them on notice from that perspective. You can also come in here and you can perform searches because basically the what is has the information that you can search on, or the who, and because any report that you see that has activity can also be seen from the point of view of, say, like our searching capability. So if I come over here and I click on this guy and go to this guy and go right over here and go to search, I can go ahead and run a search, just a generic search, and see everything that's been going on. Or I can isolate the search, say I'll come up, double click, say I want to exclude any logon information, or the successful logon, redo my search, and I can see other activity. I can see activity happening on my database servers. I can see activity happening up on Microsoft.com. You know, I have complete visibility insofar as what's going on in the environment from that point of view. It's all depending upon the different types of application packages that you have deployed from a Netwrix perspective. Now, in the world of what we call training and monitoring, which is 514, basically you have a couple of different areas that you can look at there. One of those, say, like would be related to, say, like if you were using SharePoint, for instance, would be like content changes. Being able to see, you know, who's performed content changes insofar as your SharePoint systems are concerned. If you've deployed those and they're under the scope from a DFS perspective, then basically you're going to need to be able to monitor that kind of information. And you can see exactly who's doing that, and also more importantly, you can see if anybody's just not, as they say, checking out information the way they normally should do if they're going to access your information, but if they just can connect and they can just start reading your data. So you'll know exactly who is doing that, right? Because that could be, that by the way, that important note to self, if you're actually using Office 365 and SharePoint Online, try not to share anything anonymously. Because if you share anything anonymously, that means that anybody in the internet can access it, not just the person who you just sent that link to. And you might find that they are, okay? So that's a word to the wise from that point of view. Okay, now in terms of SharePoint, right, if I was looking at this on the SharePoint side specifically, SharePoint has a very interesting report in here, also one of those that looks at the users with the most activity, and basically shows you the most active users within the environment. If you're looking at to see what the person was doing, you can click on any blue link inside of any Netwrix report, and it would allow you to quickly see exactly what that user was doing. This is what Steve pointed out, the drill down capabilities of our reporting from that point of view. Okay, I think at this point in time, I can go ahead and start backing out of the demonstration. I hope that I've been able to show you how Netwrix Auditor can complement what your efforts are insofar as the DFS standard from the State of New York Department of Finance and from a cybersecurity point of view. And I'll go ahead and be prepared to hand over to Jara for her comments as we get ready to get to the question and answer period from that perspective. Give me a second here. Jara, there you go.
Hi. All right. So I guess I've been made presenter. Give me 1 second. And I'm going to have a few questions. I'm going to, well, I know that Netwrix had a few questions to, that they wanted to answer, and I was also going to ask Ash Marcos a number of questions as well. So I could start with asking my questions. Just give me 1 second. Ash?
Yes.
Excellent. So I guess my first question for you, based upon some feedback we got from people attending, is let's start by asking what a useful definition of a risk assessment is as outlined by DFS, if you could speak toward that a little bit.
Sure. So risk assessment in general, what it means is you have to identify what is a value to you and then how are you protecting it. So for DFS, their recommendation is to follow the NIST risk assessment or any other like ISO risk assessment. Basically, it comes down to, in a very simple English, what are the assets that you need to protect? Is it your accounting system? Is it your customer database? Who has access to it? How are you protecting it? And if you get compromised, what happens to that? And then basically, based on that, you identify which asset is very important to you and that you need to protect, and then which are less important to you. You still have to protect it, but you're willing to accept some type of risk. So your end user computer, you might say, okay, I'm not worried about data leakage on that because I'm just want to make sure there's no virus on it. But your database, you want to make sure that only limited people have access to it.
Okay, thank you. The next question I have for you is if you go into, if you speak more toward gap analysis and what that means in relation to DFS.
Sure. So gap analysis basically means you probably have a baseline or some sort of framework or artifact that you have in place, and what is a gap, right? So in terms of DFS, like I showed you earlier, there's 17 controls that you have to meet. And if you have other compliance or maybe you have your own internal security policy, and that gap analysis basically is going to say, okay, what do you have in place and what areas that you need improvement, what areas that you don't have anything. And then based on that, you're gonna focus on those gaps.
And could you get more specific about the impact that this regulation in DFS will have on any business that needs to be compliant in the future?
Sure. So let me start with why New York is setting the standard for this type of compliance. So, as you know, New York is the hub for financial companies, and as you are well aware now, everything is on digital, like cloud, mobile. You can access your bank information from anywhere, right? So the service provider, the companies that you're serving, your customer, if you get compromised, right, there's a huge breach and it has a huge business impact. So recently you saw the Equifax deal, right? It forced the CEO resignation. You saw the Home Depot, and you see all the high profile. These are the high profile. There are a lot of low profiles. It's a lot of litigation, right? You get sued for it. So it has a huge impact. So that's why New York is taking the step to make sure if you're licensed in New York, you need to put a security measure. So security, I mean, if you don't enforce it, most people don't take it serious. So that's why regulatory enforcement is needed. And then from a future impact, it has twofold. One, you should be compliant, right? But also, as we move into a digital world, you need to make sure your customer data is protected, right? And if your customer data is not protected, or even your own data is not protected, and you get exposed, that could take you out of business. that could bring a bunch of lawsuits, right? People will drop you and go to another competing companies.
All right, thank you. And a little bit in that vein, could you just speak about the kind of fines and how companies will get penalized when not being compliant with DFS and the timeline in which people will start getting those penalizations?
Yeah, so DFS is slightly different. It's not you should be compliant, and if there's an incident happen, they will come and audit you. It's you must be compliant, and I want to see it. So basically, there is a DFS portal. For those deadline, you need to go on the portal, and then you need to submit what they're asking you for, right? So for February, they're strictly asking you, you need to upload some of your reports, some of your policy and procedures. They need to see some type of artifact. And then they're going to process it, and if they don't like it, they're going to come back to you with deficiency, and probably they didn't define it. Most likely they're going to say, hey, you have this deficiency. You have 30 days, 90 days to fix it and come back to us. Now, if you don't fill it, if you don't go online and submit that and you don't meet those deadlines, they could revoke your license. They could penalize you. They haven't defined the penalty, but they can go up to revoking your license to do business in New York State.
Okay, thank you. And one final question. Can you speak more towards what it means when encrypting internal data that stays on site?
Sure. So to clarify, when they say encrypting data at rest or encrypting data in transit, they're not saying encrypt everything. They're strictly saying encrypt your PII or your sensitive data. So you need to do a data discovery, identify which are customer data, which are sensitive data that you have, and you should selectively encrypt those. But it doesn't mean you should encrypt everything.
All right, thank you. I think that's all the questions that we had on our end. I could turn it over to Netwrix for a moment to see if there was anything that they wanted to answer in regards to Q&A.
Okay, we're still here.
Okay, I didn't know if I didn't have any questions for you, but I know that you may have had some questions internally.
There was a question that was okay. There was a question regarding can Netwrix Auditor be used to monitor applications, specifically applications that may not have any real logging of themselves, and the video capability that we saw earlier in my demonstration. That's an application that can be used in that sort of vein. So what you do is basically you can tell it to when the particular application runs to start recording what the user is doing. So that will allow you to do that. That was the only other question that I saw in the questions panel from that perspective.
Okay, excellent. So thank you, Netwrix team. And now if I could just move on, if there are no more questions for us in the chat box, I mean, if you feel free to do this now, but if not, I wanted to just move forward in regards to next steps. So I would first of all like to thank everyone for attending. I hope you found this informative. And I would like you to please make sure to look out for an email that includes the recording of the webinar in the next day or two. And in addition to that, please be sure to fill out your survey. If you have not, I see that I already have gotten a few submitted. When you do fill out the survey, you'll automatically be eligible to receive a $25 Amazon gift card. And again, we really do very much value your feedback. And along that vein, we also would like to follow up in an email that contains a DFS readiness assessment. This assessment enables our MDS compliance experts more insight about how far along your organization is on your journey toward full DFS compliance, and we would be very happy to assist you on the rest of that journey. This is really the first step to see what you've already done, what you need to do, and what you already have in place that helps you be DFS ready. So thank you again. I think we're all set. I'd like to say thank you to Ash, Marcos, Steve Turk, and Roy Lopez once again for all of your insight and expertise. Please do fill out that survey, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good day.